All right, let's go ahead and get back to more asks. Granny TWD, how's it going? I'd like to respond to the recent Mork and Mindy comments. Just rewatched that episode in the past week. One of my favorites, Daryl with the kids. I know, it's so adorable. I love it when the kids, like when he first gets there and they're running through and some of them like grab his hand and kind of hug him, and it's just so adorable. To me, Daryl is totally enjoying watching that scene until Mork says he should take her dancing, and wham, when she responds with a few stuttered sounds, starting with oh, that look, so sad he is gone. I think when Izzy lying beside him, he regrets the kids will never know life as it was, and he says you can't miss something you never had. He is still back there at O and his loss of Beth, just my opinion. So I should have probably lumped this in with the last Ask video I did because we talked about this a little bit. But yeah, I agree. And I think it's interesting that you pulled out O because it's such a subtle thing that like most of the GA wouldn't get, but you got to understand the nature of trauma, right? I mean, of course he was traumatized when she got shot, but he was traumatized before that when she got taken. And, that whole him running after her, calling her name, that was a trauma in and of itself. And especially given that she did get shot after that, he never really got to talk to her again. He would remember the last thing she said to him, and it was that. It was, oh. So, there's going to be haters and skeptics who are going to say, no, you're giving the writers too much credit. It was something she said. It was, oh, it was not that big a deal. But to Daryl, it was because that was a trauma. So I totally agree with you. And I didn't address this as much in the comment before about him saying you can't miss what you never had. That's a direct correlation to Beth saying you're going to miss me so bad when I'm gone. Like that's on purpose that they're using the same verbiage there. So yeah, I totally agree. And he's thinking he never had it. It puts me in mind of just the way that Norman has explained this, like in that in the specials that the carolers all freaked out about when he talked about how um, Daryl really did think she had a crush on him. And when she said, oh, he thought that was her saying she didn't and he had misconstrued her feelings, which I don't think he did misconstrue her feelings. I think the oh was about shock on her part, not denial of it. So he's thinking in his head that she never really did like him, therefore he never had it, and he just liked her. And that's probably untrue. She probably did like him. Like there's a lot of evidence that she had a crush on him too. So it's very sad. It's really very tragic where Daryl is at with all of this. And I think that's why he's watching other people who are holding hands and finding romance because he's thinking that even though I do think he's still in love with Beth and he does still miss her, he's also thinking that he's an idiot for thinking that because she never liked him, which is a misconception on his part, and he just wants it with somebody. So yeah, I totally agree with this analysis, and yeah, it just makes it so much more tragic, but I like that you've pointed that out. So yeah, thanks so much for sending that in. And once again, yeah, with the Mork and Mindy thing, he did get really sad once the romance angle of it hit him because he wouldn't have been thinking about the romance angle when he was watching it with Merle as a kid. That wouldn't have even been like on his radar back then, right? So it was like he was just enjoying it, almost like he was one of the kids. He went back to being a little kid in his mind and watching the show that he watched when he was a little kid. Like we all do that when we watch sitcoms and stuff that we watched when we were young. And then the romance came and it's like it hit him like a brick. And suddenly he was not a child anymore. He was back with Beth and reliving that tragedy. So yeah, great interpretation. All right. Hey, I've been watching your videos since last year because it gives me so much hope. Yay. And I'm excited for season 3 of Daryl Dixon. I have a question. What do you think of what Carol said in the trailer when she said, first you survive what happened, then you survive the survival? If you're lucky, you can start living again. Carol obviously said this to Daryl. How does it relate to Beth's return? I have a strong feeling it's about her. Give me your opinion and analysis, even if it takes 10 hours. I'd love to hear it. You shouldn't say that to me because I might go for a while. Okay. Yeah, I think this is part of the theme. There's a really series-wide theme about survival versus living, right? Survival is doing whatever you can just to stay alive, just to stay breathing when you're in a situation that is very, very dangerous. So when there are walkers all around you and you are just desperately trying to kill them or get through them without being bitten, that would be an example of survival. But it's no way to live, right? You don't want to be in fight or flight all the time. And I will say, guys, that the idea of the of fight or flight and your nervous system, regulating your nervous system, has come really into the mainstream public zeitgeist, if you will, a lot in the last 10 years. And so looking at it from that perspective, dystopian worlds like this, and The Walking Dead is like the ultimate example of it is about people who are constantly in survival mode, right? They're constantly in fight or flight. And that's why it's very easy to hook audiences. We're all just absolutely mesmerized, right? Um, but that's why it's so devastating sometimes for the characters because it's not healthy to live in fight or flight all the time. In fact, it's very, very detrimental to both your physical and your emotional health. So anyway, the point is survival is one thing and it's necessary sometimes. If you're in that situation with walkers all around you, obviously you have to go into fight or flight in order to survive. But once you get out of that situation, a big overarching theme of the show is okay, now what? How can we build something and get back to living more normal lives while still guarding against all of the dangers, right? And then it becomes very much about the human drama and interpersonal relationships and emotions and having lost people and all the things that we love about The Walking Dead, right? So Carol saying this, the thing it reminded me of when I first heard it was Rick's speech in 510, where he talked about his grandfather who went to war, and his grandfather said every day, "You're already dead. Now get up and go to war." And he did that it was kind of a reverse psychology to get himself to survive so that he was not afraid to get up and go out there and fight. And being at war is another example of being in fight or flight all the time. You could die at any time, right? Um, and Daryl didn't like that. Remember that Daryl rejected what Rick said and walked away because he said, "We're not like them. We're not like," meaning the walkers, right? We're not them. And there was just parallel things going on there. They were all in their own pain. And Rick was trying to uh, motivate his people so that they could survive because that's where they were at. They were in survival in that episode. They didn't have water. They were trying to survive. They didn't have shelter. They were trying to survive. There was this big storm. They were trying to survive. The walkers were trying to get in. They were trying to survive, right? And that's where they were. But Daryl was still very much in um, grief about Beth. And so he knew that she would not be all about survival. She was about living and about the emotion and about the humanity of it. And so that's why he said, "We're not them." I don't like that. I reject that, but during that speech, that was the "We Are the Walking Dead" speech, right? Which is what Daryl didn't like. But it was very much a speech about surviving now, and you get to live later. And so again, that's just like a major theme. And so when I hear Carol say this, that's what it made me think of, which it's Rick's speech, but that was the episode where the music box woke up. So it's all very connected. Um, you survive. I mean, think about it this way. You survive what happened could be in an overarching way, it could be about the original turn, right? The apocalypse, the zombie virus hitting, all of that. Then you survive the survival because it's like, okay, you survived. You didn't become a zombie. You're alive. But now what? Now you have to scrape for food. Now you have to figure out how to protect yourself. Now you have to find other people to help you survive because nobody's going to survive long on their own. All of that. You have to survive the survival. And I think survive the survival is very much about the emotion of it. It's very much about okay, we survived, but we lost all these people. And do we even want to keep going because we're so much in the grief of what we've been through and the trauma of what we've been through, right? Um, and if you're lucky, you can start living again. And I did think about this briefly, although honestly, it was one of those things that kind of went into my head and then skipped right back out because I wasn't focusing on it. There's the lucky theme, right? They've used lucky various different ways. And the one that I first picked up on that I know I've said many times is that um, they say it when there are people who really don't know how to survive on their own. And sometimes that can be because of survival skills, like they don't know how to find their own food or how to kill walkers or whatever. But it can also be people that are just kind of idiots, like Spencer was, and you're going, dude, how did you survive? Why are you still here? But they use it a lot to say that they're lucky because someone else came along who can help them survive. And that's one way they use it. There are different variations. So, I mean, Rick literally said that about Spencer. I'm not going to remember the exact words, but it was the one where they were all looking for the gun. Like Negan, there was a gun missing from the artillery, and they were looking for it, and Spencer had hidden it in his vent. And so Rick said something, he was getting mad at him, and he said something to him like that. You're lucky we're here. Like, you're lucky that you ended up in Alexandria because for a long time the Alexandrians were behind walls and that's why they survived. Otherwise, you'd be toast by now, dude. And then Spencer proved that because very quickly he got himself in trouble with Negan and got himself killed just because he was being, I don't know, maybe not an idiot, but he was betraying people and trying to lift himself up in an egotistical way. And Negan saw right through that and killed him, and it was pretty gruesome. Um, but the thing is, lucky is a theme we saw around Beth. She did say it to Edwards, and I always felt like it was kind of the same thing there. Like she said, you're lucky to be able to be bored. He was talking about how he was bored. He used to be um, a research person, and now he was just drowning in boredom. And she's like, dude, you're lucky if you are in a good enough situation that you're bored, right? So it's kind of the same thing. But in a way, I think that Carol's line kind of clarifies it here, that the lucky ones are the ones who go beyond survival and are able to live in a more normal capacity, because that applies to those situations too. I mean, Edwards and the same with Spencer, they were not scraping for food. They were not fighting walkers at every junction. They were in a living situation where they actually got to be fairly normal compared to the rest of the world, right? Um, so yeah, but we did hear it around Beth, so I've always equated the luck thing with her, even though we've heard it around a lot of other characters too. I don't think it's uniquely hers, but we did see it around her. And so yeah, I think it's a show-wide theme. But if you wanted to relate it to Beth more specifically, first you survive what happened, that could be the gunshot. Then you survive the survival, her trying to survive on her own without team family. If you're lucky, you can start living again. Living could also be equated with family, finding people you care about, right? Because from a, I don't know, physical 3D perspective, living is very much about having what you need. And like I said, just living a more normal life rather than scraping for survival. So that's having a community where people are a little bit safer behind walls, not 100% safe across the board, because nobody can guarantee that, but just that you're not fighting for your life all the time, and people are working together, and they actually do have jobs, and the kids actually do go to school, and things like that. Okay, but from an emotional level, living is not being alone. It's finding people you care about, and whether it's romance or familial ties, or even just other people in the community that you can have their back and work together, all of that would be living versus surviving. So if you're lucky, you can start living again. Could mean reunions and finding family again in terms of Beth. So yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot more to say about it. I'm sure we could dive deeper, but that's what comes to mind at first. Um, it'll be interesting to see the context in which I mean, we know the scene, and Carol looks like she's hurt. She's all scraped up, and she has her shirt down off her shoulder, like a doctor is caring for her. And this is what they're talking about. So you kind of wonder about their conversation, their overall conversation that they're having about surviving versus living again. And I actually do think, my opinion, I could be wrong, because we know that trailers are often spliced together and out of order and all that. But coming from that same scene in the trailer, there's the thing that she says, or no, let's see, I think Daryl starts it out and he says, I thought it was all over. And she says, you and me both. And I really do think that they are probably talking about what happened in the tunnel at the end of season 2, because they both almost died at that point. And that was the idea, right? That was what the writers were going for, is that, they got poisoned by whatever the luminescent algae stuff was. And Daryl was lying on the ground and he wasn't getting up, and he was really close to becoming his grandfather, who died overseas and never made it home. But then that's when he saw Isabel's ghost hovering over him and telling him not to give up hope. And then the same thing with Carol and Sophia. She saw Sophia and she very easily could have, like, quote unquote, followed Sophia into the afterlife at that point. And both of them really seriously considered giving up. And that's odd for them. They're not the two that usually consider giving up, but they almost did. It was almost over for them. And I'm pretty sure that line is in the same scene with this one that you're talking about. First you survive what happened, then you survive the survival. And if you're lucky, you can start living again. Maybe that just goes to show, maybe they're talking about, they feel like in that tunnel, they survived the survival and they were able to pull through, and now they have to start living again. And how they're doing that is trying to get home, right, to their family. And clearly things are not going to go very well from A to B. It's going to be a lot more complicated than that. So, yeah, I mean, that's how I would interpret that. And the lucky part does remind me of Beth. So I think it applies to a lot of things on a lot of different levels, but it most definitely could be a foreshadow of them finding her soon. And I don't know, we're all hoping that we will see or hear something about Beth in the third season, and I think we very well could. I'm not at all giving up on that. But if Carol does go missing and get taken, then we will be right up to the point in season 5, we'll be up to the point in the template right before he finds Beth, right? Like, because we're not talking about when Beth got taken, although I suppose you could see that it is parallel to that too. But we're talking about when Carol got taken, which was in episode 6, and all he did was go get Rick, and then they went and got them both. So we're really going to be super close. We're just going to be really paying close attention to that template. So yeah, thank you for the ask, and I hope that was enough for you, even though it wasn't 10 hours. If I think of anything else, I will add it on later. Let's see. Next one. If Beth returns in season 3, will she become a main character and lead alongside Norman and Melissa in season 4? And do you expect her to have an input on the show in the future? Um, I mean, in terms of season 3, because I don't think we're going to see her throughout the entire season, we might just see her at the end. She probably won't be a super main character then, but in season 4, she'll be pretty close to one. Yeah. And I think she'll have, it just depends, I think, on a lot of things, but I think the writers always give the more main characters input on the actors, input on their characters. So yeah, there's no reason that she shouldn't. I mean, on the one hand, they will be following the story that Gimple set up from the beginning, because they always do. And they generally don't allow the characters to, or the actors, I should say, in their input to change the story. But they usually give them input on smaller things and how something looks in a particular episode or how to handle a particular theme or something like that. So a really good example of that, I mean, of course, we have lots of examples of Norman having input on Daryl's character and all of that. I think most of us are pretty familiar, but I remember this is what always comes to mind. I remember back when Beta was killed, and the writers really went out of their way to try and credit both Norman and Ryan for coming up with how Beta was killed. And I just didn't buy that at all. Not only because he's a big character and his death was a big deal, from a villain perspective, but they stabbed him in the eyes, and that's really potent symbolism. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think they were lying. I think they let Norman and Ryan come up with the choreography and how it would work and everything. And so, in that sense, they were giving them credit for it, which is good. But I do think that there were certain aspects of it that they had to adhere to. So I think it was more like Angela Kang going to them and saying, okay, well, at the end of the day, we want him to be stabbed in the eyes. You guys figure out what it's going to look like. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like that with all the characters. Okay, this is what we know needs to happen, but we would like your input on how we get there. And so in that sense, I'm sure they'll do that with Emily the same as they would with any other character. But they will be still adhering to the story that they set up to tell a long time ago in season 4 when Gimple took over. So there is that. All right, let's do one more. Hello, please answer my question. After Bethyl reunion, if Beth returns, what do you think will happen to Carol? Will she return home, and will Daryl and Beth continue their journey together? I do think that at some point, I said this before, Carol will need to return home to Ezekiel. But I don't know if it will happen right away. A lot of people have pointed out that Dead City is a few years in the future, and if it's in the future, why have Beth and Daryl not returned? Why does Maggie not know about them? And I would just say that, I don't know, like people are thinking maybe Beth and Daryl and Carol stay in Europe for a few years or have a hard time getting home. That could be. I honestly don't know. But I would also argue that we don't know that Maggie doesn't know about Beth's return. And we don't know if Daryl and the people in the Commonwealth even know where Maggie is. She was in a completely different community, and Dead City did not tell us how she ended up there or why she ended up there. So when Daryl left, the communities were very much in communication. And we saw Maggie being the one to say, we need to go out and explore and find out what else is out there. And that's part of the reason Daryl left, right, in the first place. But then when we get Dead City, and it is a few years in the future, Maggie's at a completely different community and things seem really dire. Like some shit has gone down and we don't know what it was. So we don't know why she is there or what she knows of Alexandria or if she's in communication with them or if they know what's going on with her or if Beth and Daryl Death and Beryl, yeah, either way. If Beth and Daryl and Carol came back, if Maggie would even know that, you know what I mean? There's just too many things we don't know, so I try not to assume anything. Um, so, I mean, I guess the answer is, like I said, I do think that Carol's going to need to return at some point to finish up her arc with Ezekiel, but I have no idea if they're going to be in Europe or go other places for a while, or if they're going to return right away. I don't know. I think it could be either one, and I think we'll know more as it unfolds, but right now, I couldn't say anything that really has any evidence behind it. It's all conjecture. So I wish I could answer that more, but I really have no idea, no more idea than you do. So, all right, guys, I'm going to call it there, and I will talk to you in the next video.